approach generally in our plans. When we have good performance measures to use, we've inserted those into the plan. And that's something we never had 10 years ago. We just did not have that sort of approach in the state health plan. So I think, from my perspective, I think that's the area that we probably need to revisit and reconsider based on Commissioner O'Grady's comments. We are trying not to be too stringent. So for nursing homes and home health agencies, for example, we're using Nursing Home Compare, the measures that are adopted by CMS for that platform, and Home Health Compare. And essentially, our updated chapters are saying if you want to come in and be a new home health agency provider, you want to be a new nursing home provider in Maryland, we want to see that you're at least average or above average in terms of those compare scoring systems. And to some extent, you certainly are going to continue to have lots of nursing homes and home health agencies in Maryland that are not performing at an average level. They're subpar.
So part of our problem is that we can't revoke the certificate of need for the below average and district performers. That's sort of built into the process.
But a number of areas where if you tie with the local incumbents, that's not good enough to get entry. You have to show you're better. And I don't want anything I'm saying here to indicate Paul has done a great job as we move forward since whenever I started on the commission 6 years ago or something. It's all moving in the right direction. If we're talking about opening them back up again, because candidly, I don't know whether the rest of the commissioners agree with me that this is a problem. I mean, it's clearly in the past the way Maryland did business for decades. I think it's a problem. I like kind of open markets, but if I'm not interested in protecting vested interests. I'm interested in not hurting them and making it unfair to them, but I'm not interested in trying to give them kind of like I said, a thumb on the scale, that all they have to do is keep doing what they're doing, and as long as the new guys don't leave them in the dust, we're going to keep the new guys out. So it's like, I don't know, it's a theme, but it's seldom directly discussed in the commission. I think I've seen it across a number of areas where I've done reviews, and it's like I say, it's a vestige of an old way of thinking, I think, but I don't speak for the commission, you guys. It's sort of like
if I could, I think I'd say
let's say it now as we head into a new review cycle, just so it's clear we have guidance to give to the staff. But if you guys disagree with me, vote me down. But I'd like to know the sense of the commission are the rest of you as concerned about this, or you don't have to be as concerned as I am, but everything's concerned about it and think it's not something we should put structures into the COMARs that again have this inside advantage, or whether we should just have a level playing field.
I've seen Commissioner Jensen and Commissioner Bondari have their hands up. Commissioner O'Grady, I'd note the point, if anybody wants to comment on that as well, I'll encourage folks to do so. I will say, just in response to your thing, I'll say for my piece, I definitely don't want rules that give an unfair competitive advantage to folks already in the state. I also don't want rules that allow the very low level out-of-state performers to come and supplement in-state under subpar performers. So I feel like there is a balance there that we should be keeping an eye on that issue as we approve new chapters. Those are very fair questions to ask and to press on as we get down to details on any particular chapter. Let me turn it over to Commissioner Jensen has got his hand up for a very long time. And before I do that, Commissioner Jensen, I could only see about 4 commissioners on the monitor. So if you've had your hand up out there and you're wondering why I'm not calling on you, please feel free to speak up. Commissioner Jensen?
Oh, Chairman Sargent, this is Marcus Wang. I'm not going to interrupt Commissioner Jensen. I just want to let you know my hand's up too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. First of all, I recall at our retreat that several conversations got wrapped up at the end by suggesting that they would be discussed in our annual assessment of the state health plan. And I'm wondering if anybody went back and looked at those minutes and found those issues and built them into this presentation. That's number one. And number two, question number two is this. Is there any opportunity here to look at the timeline for prosecuting certificates of need? It seems to me, my understanding is that there's a statutory timeline which we rarely meet, number one. And number two, it just seems to me to not match up with the needs of the patients and the healthcare providers that it takes so long for certificates of need to get processed.
So I'll take those in reverse order. For many years, the deadline in the statute for completing these reviews it had no teeth. It basically said, get these done within, I think the two different deadlines were like 150 days and 180 days, depending on whether it was a contested review. And if you weren't completed in that time, the law said you can petition for the commission to make a decision. It's so kind of, go to a judge and tell them that you need an order for the commission to act on this. So there really wasn't much in the way of teeth, and nobody ever did that, not surprisingly. For the last couple of years, we actually have a real deadline that we've introduced. Maybe we've been too conservative because we did not apply that deadline universally to every type of CON review. But we now have 120 days after docketing to take action on uncontested reviews, with some exceptions, including establishing new hospitals. Cardiac surgery is another exception. There's a number of exceptions. But if it's an uncontested review and we don't take action within 120 days of docketing, it's an automatic approval. So we run out of time, essentially, and the project is allowed to go forward. Probably also not surprising, we haven't let that happen in the last 2 years since we've had that in place. But that's kind of where we stand as far as timelines. We still take too long to review contested cases. That's kind of the big category where we have very lengthy review times. And there's still too much dead air time, I think, in those reviews. There's a reason why contested cases tend to take longer, but internally we've grappled with that. Part of the problem is we're trying to triage. So we're actually trying. It's not a first in, first out process here, and when we've thought about kind of the general fairness of that approach, it kind of breaks down because you don't want to certainly take a lot of time for a facility that needs to expand capacity. They've got a demand profile that clearly indicates we need more capacity for a service. There's always an effort to try to get to those faster and get them done faster, and we do. That means that longer term projects where that sort of time issue really isn't. So if you want to introduce a new service, which is at a facility, for example, and there's a variety of existing providers already providing that service, that's not something that you really are going to lose a lot of money if you don't initiate that service. So those tend to get reprioritized. We will take longer times on those, but we're inserting other projects that may have come in later that do have a time issue related to them. On the other issue, what I recall from the retreat is that
Can I interrupt and just respond?
Sure.
Because I think that we should take a hard look at creating a more efficient process for the contested certificates of need and a deadline, because I believe that the commission inadvertently is used as a competitive leverage, right? If I don't want my competitors to get their certificate of need approved, I merely need to make it contested, and then that gets pushed out for sometimes years. And I don't think that that's appropriate for us to be used that way inadvertently. So I'd just like us to take a harder look at that. I mean, listen, I'm a lawyer, and I think part of the problem with the process is we have too many lawyers involved. Because a lawyer, by definition, if I don't want you to get a competitive certificate of need approved, all I have to do is hire a lawyer, and they can ball it up forever. And it just doesn't seem to me we should be used that way. So that's my editorial comment, but I think it's something that we ought to seriously consider.
Let me ask a question, Paul, on that vein. Is that part of the procedural regulations we're working on?
Procedural regulations are definitely an area that we would address that problem. So
because I think Commissioner Jensen has a good point. We want to speed it up as fast as possible, and that seems to me the place where we would be looking into doing that.
And that's the procedural slide that was presented, right?
the last slide, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt you, Paul. You had the second question, and then.
So the first issue you raised was the state health plan, and I was at that retreat.
And we were at our retreat, and several issues got punted to. Let's talk about that when we look at the state health plan. And I just wondered if somebody took a look back at what those issues were.
Yeah,
if they got put into the slides that you.
My look back indicated that the discussion was there really wasn't so much discussion of changes in the state health plan as it is currently formatted, and as it basically has been formatted for a long time, which is that it's not really a plan. It's not what most people, when they hear the word plan, would recognize in our state health plan regulations. State health plan has become project review standards. So that really happened in the late 1980s, actually, early 1990s is when that changed. And there was discussion at the retreat of, do we want to think about a state health plan and an approach to developing what we call the state health plan that kind of returns to the older model of the state health plan that started out. In other words, not just for project review standards, but do we want to have a more conventional plan that really talks about what sort of healthcare delivery system do we want, or at least in certain categories of service, what sort of delivery system do we want? What do we see as the problems or gaps in having, a better model of the healthcare delivery system, and therefore kind of proactively identifying what are the changes that we'd like to see in the state health plan. And I think the tenor of the discussion was that doesn't necessarily mean something that we regulate under CON, or that necessarily directly relates to project review. But would there be value in having a state health plan that kind of proactively provides direction to the provider community on changes, whether they be within our regulatory oversight or not, that we think are necessary in the way resources are allocated or the way that service delivery is organized? I'm not trying to address that here. I think that's a discussion that we should continue to have, and I'm certainly open to rethinking what is the state health plan. But at this point in time, perhaps unfortunately, I'm still dealing with the type of model state health plan that we have had for many decades, and I'm just trying to lay out, my thoughts on what are the priorities in terms of updating, again, what are essentially project review standards.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Bandari, and then Commissioner Wang, you're on deck. Commissioner
Thank
Bandari?
you for the wonderful presentation. I have a question about general hospice services. You mentioned many jurisdictions has single general hospice provider. What is the reason some has single and other has more than one hospice provider? Because I think for the general public and for the patients, more than one is always a better option. Can you just clarify what was the reason for single hospice provider?
Well, I think the reason this has occurred is because for many years, actually until, well, I guess I would say it's still really kind of the current approach in our hospice chapter regulation, which is wrong. It is regulation at a jurisdictional level. So, not surprisingly, when you look at these jurisdictions where there is only one authorized hospice provider, they tend to be some of the smaller jurisdictions. Not in every case, but certainly the smaller population, the rural jurisdictions, that's where you see that condition, where there's only one provider. And clearly it doesn't make sense for us to try to open up a jurisdiction that has one authorized hospice provider and say, hey, we're looking for people to come in here and develop a hospice to serve this jurisdiction. They're too small. You're not going to get any interest. So I think, a key part of what we're going to be proposing in discussing an update to this regulation is we need to finally get rid of this jurisdictional approach. We need to look at regions. We need to create regions that create large enough markets that you might generate some interest, either by someone coming into Maryland to establish a new hospice, or for existing hospices, they would have a more attractive option if they could expand into a 3-county area or a 4-county area instead of just one. So when we look at the areas that we want to have some impact on, it's Southern Maryland, it's the Eastern Shore, and it's Western Maryland. And certainly when you look at Southern Maryland, I think we can viably create a regional approach where we would have possibly have some new entrants, possibly have some expanding hospices, but we would be giving them a viable market to expand into or to establish a new service. The Eastern Shore, we really have throughout the Eastern Shore, with the exception of Cecil County, single hospice jurisdictions. And we have 2 hospices who kind of carve up that area. But as a region, it's a few 100,000 people. So we think that there again, that would be an area that if we say this whole region is available as an opportunity for entering the market or for expanding, we might have some success in at least getting some of those jurisdictions with more than one choice of a hospice provider. Western Maryland is tougher because it's bigger geographically, and I think it's a more difficult economic proposition to try to serve those large Western jurisdictions. And again, they're not the biggest population areas, so we might have to be creative in thinking about some different approaches to attracting competition there. The pushback that I referred to earlier is kind of the flip side of that. When you have a very small hospice serving just one jurisdiction and it's not a big jurisdiction, then obviously they're very nervous. quite rightly, about competition coming into their small jurisdiction. But I think if you can frame this as a regional approach, in which they would also have an opportunity to expand within their region if they're willing to take that step, I think we might have some success, maybe not in eliminating all of these single hospice jurisdictions, but at least some of them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Wang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here virtually. But, I want to say I agree with Commissioner Jensen that we don't want to allow folks to misuse the commission to delay the process for their potential competitors. And I think we can all agree we want the process to be thorough, comprehensive, and as efficient as possible. And in my experience, the staff of the commission is already doing a really great job with that. And I wanted to follow up on Commissioner O'Grady's great comments with my own perspective. Because like you, I'm a firm free market evangelist. I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur. And actually, I came onto this commission believing that the CON process was a barrier to new entrants and a hindrance to access to healthcare. But today I'm here to say I no longer believe that. I think private sector principles, free market principles are fine when you're dealing with end-use consumers who have a choice. They're buying a t-shirt or a car, they're making a choice they don't need to make. It's up to them. Buy the Nikes, don't buy the Nikes. Water will find its own level, right? But people don't choose to break their leg or get cancer. And the end user of this healthcare system here isn't really a consumer in the typical sense. So we can't construct the infrastructure around them as though having, breast cancer or drug addiction is a lifestyle choice akin to, what brand of jeans you prefer. So I think we have to continue to regulate. We have to gatekeep. We have to hold new entrants to the highest of standards, higher than before if necessary, because I believe that is ultimately in the best interests of the end users, the people of Maryland.
And I would concur with that. I would just say I don't want to hold the new entrants to a higher standard than the current players. I would just want a level playing field.
And Commissioners, thank you. I think those are both excellent, both areas, meaning looking at competitiveness and the standards for an individual CON and looking at the question of how do we make the CONs faster are really important issues. And I just wanted to highlight for the commissioners, here's what we can do to help. Procedural regulations are not even exciting for lawyers to read. But as you can see, when they come out, they are important, and that's the roadmap that determines how fast the CON go. So think about when we get a set of draft procedural regulations to review, how do we approach that to make sure that we're doing our job to clearing out procedural barriers? And I'd encourage the staff to think about when that comes, that may be more regulations than average non-lawyer commissioners can just read through over the weekend. Are there ways that you can educate us on those drafts? And maybe it's not a special session or a special just educational meeting that doesn't make decisions or something to make sure that we can understand that and where the choices are made. And then as individual sections of the health plan come up, Commissioner Grady, I absolutely think we should be considering when we change the regulations for a particular type of CON, do we have the concerns that you expressed in mind? Are there any other questions or comments about the status, the priority order and timeline? With that, we have a legislative duty to adopt and to conduct a review and adopt a priority order and timeline. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to adopt the annual assessment of the state health plan priorities and timeline for review and revision of state health plan regulations? So moved. Commissioner O'Connor moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Gordon? I'm sorry, Commissioner Jordan won. I appreciate it, though. With that, I'll take, unless anybody has any additional questions or comments.
Randy, I ask this every year when we go through this, and you would make us aware of a situation where somebody wants to apply for one of our regulations. None of them are on hold, or that they're prevented from applying because it's just not possible, such as somebody wants to add an OB unit, even though you don't think they might, or something like this. Or the beds, or whatever it is. Forget open heart surgery, but just basic things. This is not going to restrict in the next year anybody from applying.
No.
Thank you.
One other question too. Paul, you talked about competition among the hospice agencies. Do we have any numbers in regard to the optimal number of hospice workers per age population?
I don't think we have anything.
Do we have the number of surgeons you need for population? Anything about hospice workers per age population?
No, we don't have staff to population ratios.
Because you really can't use population as a gauge as a need for hospice. It would have to be aged population.
One of the problems you have with
East Shore is very old.
One of the problems you have with hospice and home health, in terms of trying to regulate those under CON, is it's different from some of the other things we regulate. That I don't think it's actually possible to say the state of Maryland or some region in Maryland needs this many hospices, or this many home health agencies. Obviously, you can have a big home health agency that serves lots of jurisdictions, can do a good job doing that.
I meant hospice workers per se, not number of agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion to approve the annual assessment and setting priorities?
Aye.
Aye.